We have a right to know what's going on with our immigration system under this president. We see how this guy got a visa and what kind of training the FBI is getting that would cause a special agent in charge. That's a big deal to immediately say, well, there's no evidence of anti-Semitism. In other words, they've gone woke. Don't mention that. Shh. Don't mention. He's a jihadi. No. Don't even give out the name till we get our press release ready. Shh. Don't do that. Which is outrageous.
This is where freedom rings.
If you believe in America, if you believe in the Constitution empowers us. It's a new day. America's back. America's back, and America's going to get strong again. We're going to defend America, and we're going to defend our interests.
Liberty's voice, Levin TV.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Levin TV. Welcome back. Well, you saw what happened at that Texas synagogue outside of Dallas, about 20 miles northwest. You also saw how the FBI's immediate knee-jerk response was, oh, this has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. So a jihadi travels to the United States from London, where there's a lot of jihadis these days. I remember the good old days when you would travel England and there was no problem. Now you travel throughout England and there's lots of problems. Rape is through the ceiling, murder, and so forth. I mean, it was very rare, right? You had these bobbies walking around like they came out of the 1400s with these big hats and other stuff, redcoats. Not so much now. They're there, but they now have real cops with real guns and bullets. In any event, this is a major area now, Britain and particularly London, where the jihadis have formed, and other parts of Europe as well. And so this jihadi comes to the United States, gets a tourist visa. Even though he was on the British list as a potential threat and terrorist, given what he has said about 9/11, he was apparently also on one of our lists, you know, and apparently we have a lot of lists of Americans now, but he's not one of them. And he gets into this country, gets a visa, and 2 weeks later he does this. And of course, the first thing from the FBI is, no, there's no evidence of anti-Semitism here. No, of course not. He randomly picks a synagogue on Shabbat and takes Jews hostage, including the rabbi. He didn't go into the 7-Eleven. He didn't go into the Target. He didn't go to... No, he goes to a synagogue. And so why would you think there's anti-Semitism? Because there is. So this is really quite troubling. Almost 60% of hate crimes tracked by the FBI are done to Jews, and that number's going up. Now, why is that number going up? How come they don't report who is committing these hate crimes against Jews? Well, who are they? Where's this happening? You notice more and more that the border's open. I'm just being blunt, and more that people are coming into this country who do not assimilate into this country. Obviously, most are fine, but I'm not talking about the most. And it doesn't take many to create havoc for a country, as we learned on 9/11 and elsewhere. And so we have this situation where more and more people are coming into the country. 2 million or so have now come in illegally. We don't have any idea who they are, and they're not just coming from Mexico or Central or South America. They're coming from all over the world, including the Middle East. And so this occurs, and the FBI's immediate response is, well, it's not necessarily anti-Semitic. In fact, we have no evidence that it is. He's singularly focused on getting Lady Al-Qaeda out of prison. Lady Al-Qaeda, who had plotted and planned to have a massive terrorist attack on the city of New York, as well as against military personnel, United States military personnel. And we're going to discuss that a little bit more broadly in a moment. But first, let's take a look at CBS News this morning and some of what they had to say about it. Go.
The FBI says it's now investigating that hostage situation in Texas as a terror-related incident targeted at the Jewish community.
Wow, what a reversal. I like the way people have said that the FBI has issued a correction. That's not a correction, it's complete reversal. And we have a right to know what's going on with our immigration system under this president. We see how this guy got a visa and what kind of training the FBI is getting that would cause a special agent in charge. That's a big deal to immediately say, well, there's no evidence of anti-Semitism. In other words, they've gone woke. Don't mention that. Shh. Don't mention. He's a jihadi. No. Don't even give out the name till we get our press release ready. Shh, don't do that. Which is outrageous. Go.
4 people were held hostage Saturday night at Congregation Beth Israel. This is in Colleyville. The suspect has been identified as Malik Faisal Akram. Now, he was killed on the scene. All the hostages made it out alive. 2 of them are now detailing the tense hours before they were released. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca reports the latest details.
It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. And we're still processing.
Appearing on CBS Mornings, Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker described the tense 11-hour standoff at Congregation Beth Israel and the moment he realized the man who claimed to be homeless was taking them hostage.
I heard a click, and it could have been anything, and it turned out that it was his gun.
Sources tell CBS News 44-year-old Malik Faisal Akram was a British citizen who arrived at New York's JFK airport about 2 weeks ago. Making his way to Texas, he stayed in a homeless shelter and somehow obtained a gun. Today, one of the hostages says...
Wait a minute. Somehow he obtained a visa from the Biden administration. How come they don't mention that? Well, we know why they don't mention that. Go ahead.
Akram claimed he targeted the synagogue because of its proximity to Afia Siddiqui, a convicted terrorist with suspected ties to al-Qaeda. He demanded her release from a Texas prison as the FBI rescue team flew in from Quantico, Virginia. Hostage Jeffrey Cohen told CBS station KTVT that after 10 hours of negotiations,
he started spouting for a good few minutes. I was going to put a bullet in each of us. Whereas earlier in the day, he was going to let us all go, and he was the only one who was going to die. But at that point, he was going to kill each of us. He even told us to get down on our knees.
But before the FBI went in, the hostages saw an opportunity to save themselves.
He put his gun down to pour some soda. And that's the point that Rabbi Charlie threw the chair and yelled, "Run."
I told them to go. I threw a chair at the gunman, and I headed for the door. And all 3 of us were able to get out without even a shot being fired.
A video shot by ABC affiliate WFAA shows the hostages escaping through a side door. Akram follows them out, then ducks back in. The tactical unit springs into action. Within seconds, Akram was dead. The hostages alive. Like many religious groups, members of this synagogue have been through active shooter training.
We were consciously watching and looking for those opportunities because that is what saved our lives.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, more and more synagogues, particularly Orthodox, but others, are having to do this active training in case somebody breaks into the synagogue, somebody wants to kill people or kidnap people. It doesn't get talked about very much, does it? Instead, we get critical race theory, right? Instead, we get about how white dominant society is so destructive. Why can't we speak openly about who's doing this? I understand there are white supremacists out there. Remember that church murder that was horrific in South Carolina? But there's also this. And I know the FBI and other federal and state and local law enforcement individuals are aware of these groups. And they're aware of people who want to continue to attack Americans, whether 9/11 and beyond. But we don't seem to be able to talk about it. We seem to be able to talk about everything else but this. Why is that? Well, one of the elements of the Democrat Party is a group called CARE. And this group called CARE, Council on Islamic Relations, is a radical left-wing group. It was formed in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia specifically, by people associated with Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. And they created CARE as a presence in the United States to push back. Against what, I'm not sure. And CARE, you can look this up yourselves, I mentioned it on radio the other night, has been involved in several protests in the state of Florida for the release of this convicted terrorist who got 86 years, Lady al-Qaeda, as they call her, for the release of Lady al-Qaeda. So when they put out a statement the other day denouncing what took place at this synagogue, Maybe they ought to get their own members and organization under control, but they're not going to. This is an organization that's welcomed by every Democrat White House, every Democrat president. There's an organization that has influence and access at the highest levels on Capitol Hill. This is an organization that is treated as representative of the Muslim community in America, even though it's not, just because it says so. And it is a very radical organization, this organization, CARE. And it concerns me a lot that there's been almost nothing reported about it. As I say, you can look it up yourselves. Joe Biden initially wouldn't mention the fact that Jews in a synagogue was targeted, that they weren't clear the motives. I mean, you're not clear the motives? Shouldn't that click in 2 seconds? Well, I can tell you for most Americans who are of good heart and sound mind, it does. And so the special agent in charge, I don't blame him as much as I blame the FBI at the highest levels for indoctrinating and training and having seminars run by CARE and other groups. You might remember that Obama basically prohibited certain language from even being used by federal law enforcement, certain courses being taken because of the concern of the focus on the Muslim community. But there's not a focus on the Muslim community. There is a focus to determine if there are individuals within the Muslim community who wish to do harm to the United States. You have to be Helen Keller not to see or hear what some of these individuals and these groups are saying, or some of the strategies they use. I mean, it's just rational if you want to protect the American people, but the Democrat Party's not rational. That's why the border's open. That's why they have so-called bail reform, which is really criminal support. You can see, I mean, I was looking in the news this morning, all the people who are dying, just unbelievable. Some poor young girl, 23 years old, going to graduate school, working the night shift. Some guy who's been arrested 4 times, now he's homeless, goes into the Burger King and stabs her to death for no reason, basically because she's white. Another woman, Asian, in New York, is pushed into the subway train and dies. It's just unacceptable what's going on in this country. The murder rate in our inner cities is just unbelievable. It's like Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. And this is what's embraced in terms of ideology and models that are absolute failures. We have this Attorney General in Michigan. Attorney General in Michigan, the first thing that comes out of her mouth is shocking about what took place in Texas. Take a look at this. Go.
We do know this is an ongoing hostage situation the White House is monitoring as well. This has been elevated to a federal level. As you watch this thing unfold, what are your biggest concerns?
Well, my biggest concern, hearing that it's at a synagogue, is that this is someone who's intent on committing hate crimes and an act of domestic terrorism. And it's not just a random person who wandered into a synagogue. Now, we don't know that for certain, but we have seen an incredible rise in rhetoric that is anti-Semitic being trafficked all around the country. And in the case of Michigan, that is why I established the first hate crimes and domestic terrorism unit anywhere in the state, one of the first in the country, because we were seeing an exponential rise in hate crimes and an exponential rise in the formation and the membership of these extremist organizations, many of which are white supremacy organizations, and they traffic in hatred against Jews and other minorities. And so it's a considerable issue. When I took office, I met with the White House, and I told them that...
Yap. So is she going to now denounce the Muslim community with a broad brush, the way she does the white communities? Of course, there's nut jobs like the Klan, the neo-Nazis, and others who are white, who promote that kind of an ideology. But there's nut jobs in the black community, in the Hispanic community, in the Muslim, I can go on and on and on. But for her to knee-jerk like this without having any facts, it turns out she's completely wrong. So here's the Attorney General in Michigan who's talking about these white groups when there wasn't a white group. It was apparently a Muslim group based in London, where, by the way, 2 teenagers have been arrested and are being questioned. And this guy belonged to an organization over there, a violent, radicalized organization in London. So maybe they ought to swing back and interview the Attorney General of Michigan again, a left-wing Democrat, and ask her, well, now what do you think? Because she has made a fool of herself, and she jumps right into the stereotype. That's not to say we don't have a problem with these people. We obviously do, but in this case, she should have held her fire a little bit before she mouthed off, and so should have the special agent in charge. But again, this is the woke mentality of the left. When I heard it was a synagogue, I immediately thought it was a jihadi. Immediately. And as I say, this lady Al-Qaeda has become somewhat of a cause célèbre for this group CARE, particularly in Texas. Texas, Austin, Texas, other cities with CARE have been protesting and demanding her release. Imagine that, her release in this country. It's really appalling. And so Joe Biden, first he immediately knee-jerks to guns, and then he realizes that gun control wouldn't have stopped this. How about Border Patrol? How about visa control? How about Democrat Party control? Maybe that would save some people's lives. I certainly think so. Go.
With regard to Texas and the synagogue, I spoke this morning with the Attorney General, and to get a rundown on, he said there was overwhelming cooperation with the local authorities and the FBI, and they did one hell of a job. This was an act of terror. Allegedly, the assertion was he got the weapons on the street. He purchased them when he landed. And it turns out there apparently were no bombs that we know of. That, you know, he said that there were bombs he had as well. But he, apparently he spent the first night in a homeless shelter. I don't have all the detail yet, so I'm reluctant to go into much more detail. But, and allegedly he purchased it on the street. The idea of background checks are critical, but you can't stop something like this if someone is on the street buying something from somebody else on the street. Except that there's so many guns that have been sold of late. It's just ridiculous. And
all right, stop. So many guns sold of late legally. That's how they know so many guns have been sold of late. He even admits that this gun obviously wasn't bought legally. It was bought off the street. That's a crime. So maybe they should support tougher sentences, more prosecutions, more effort to take people off the street who are illegally moving in guns and selling guns and so, but they don't do that. Or better yet, how about recidivists, people who are violent? How about taking them off the street? There's so much that can be done, but he has no ideas. The left has no ideas. They've created so much horror in this country, quite frankly. He says the FBI did a good job. No doubt about it, but let's be honest. The people who were kidnapped escaped on their own. The four of them, he released one, and three of them ran for the door when he put his weapon down, when the rabbi threw the chair at him. So that's how they got the hell out of there. And I'm very glad that they went in there and took care of business, quite frankly. Go ahead.
Because of the failure us to focus as hard as we should and as consistent as we should on gun purchases, gun sales, ghost guns, and a whole range of things.
Gun purchases and gun sales have nothing to do with this. Most of you watching probably have purchased a gun. I've purchased many guns. My crew have purchased guns and so forth. You have to go through a background check. And the background check is handled by the federal government. Now, it's true you can buy a gun from another person, but that's a very insignificant, a tiny percentage of the guns that are sold and bought in this country. The overwhelming majority of guns are bought through gun dealers, who are highly regulated, by the way. So you have to fill out this form. They do a criminal background check. They do all kinds of checks. I go to the NRA show from time to time when they have it in my community. I've bought several guns at that show. It's never been less than 40 minutes that I'm sitting there when they're doing a ban. Now it's even longer because of the number of people purchasing them. So it's not like you don't get a background check. Now, he may have bought a gun illegally off the street. You're not going to stop that. I mean, this is a president who can't stop murder, right? Isn't that like the worst crime? It's even worse than buying a gun illegally. I mean, every gun that's bought illegally probably isn't used in a crime. The crime itself, of course, is buying the gun illegally. But people being murdered. What are they doing about it? Well, they were cutting the cops, remember? They were attacking the cops as systemically racist. Now we have cities that people don't even want to visit anymore. Many people are trying to get out, but they don't have the money to get out because of the crime wave, the level of crime, the murder, rape, carjacking, just attacking small businesses and stealing things without much of a response. With these Soros-type prosecutors. Maybe he ought to be focusing on something he can do, like yanking Soros's chain. But that's not our Joe Biden, is it? No, it's not. Well, Joe Biden has a big contributor by the name of Hamath Palihapitiya. Say that fast 10 times. Hamath Palihapitiya, if I've mispronounced your name, too damn bad. And he's a billionaire. And he's given an enormous amount of money to the Biden campaign and the DNC. He gave $750,000 to Schumer's PAC to elect more Democrats to the Senate. He's given money to Cory Booker. Fox actually went and looked at the FEC records and his donation records. He gave money to Hillary Clinton when she ran against Trump. And of course, as I said, gave an enormous amount of money to a pro-Biden PAC in 2020, as well as the Biden campaign. So he's an ardent leftist and an ardent Democrat. And he's on a leftist podcast. One, of course, I've never listened to or never heard of. The Kalakinis, Sachs, and Freeberg podcast. Well, gee willikers, I must be missing a ton there. Sounds like a lousy law firm, quite frankly. Nonetheless, this guy, as you've probably heard by now, is a part owner of the Golden State Warriors, where they have a big mouth for a coach. And I don't know if the big mouth coach has said anything even. Isn't that Steve Kerr or something like that? If I'm wrong, who cares? It's the NBA. Now, keep in mind, the NBA has been soft on the genocide taking place in China, worse than soft, has contributed to that government and to that government's economy. LeBron James has a very big mouth in defense of the communist Chinese. When a general manager for the Mavericks dared to tweet out about Hong Kong, he denounced that general manager. And the history is well known by you. We've talked about it, and I'm sure you've looked at it on your own. LeBron James is a billionaire for all intents and purposes, and he's made his fortune in part due to his sneakers that are made by slave labor in the most western part of China, where they have their death camps, and where they have their slaves, their torture, their rape, and all the rest of it going on. Doesn't seem to affect him. But we do have a basketball player whose last name ends in Freedom. That makes it easier to remember. Enes Kanter Freedom, who has condemned all of this. He's been persona non grata in the NBA. And of course, the NBA commission is a joke. ESPN's a joke. And that they don't condemn this either. But this guy speaks what a lot of them are thinking. And he should be condemned. He speaks about what a lot of them are thinking on the left. And he's been condemned for it, and he should be. Let's check this out. Go.
What I'm proposing is that Biden engage in Clintonian, by which I mean Bill Clintonian, triangulation, which is he does not have the votes in Congress to enact a progressive agenda. He should be looking for bipartisan wins. He did it with the infrastructure bill. He could do it with this insider trading thing. He could do it on the election.
Just a reminder, I told you this is a liberal Democrat podcast site, but I want to continue. Go.
Count Act. These are things that would be, progress.
Yeah. China policy.
And importantly, momentum going into 2024.
And maybe good for Americans. Like, I mean, his China policy, the fact that he came out with a statement on the Uyghurs, I thought was very strong. It's one of the stronger things he did, but it's not coming up in the polls. And I think that whole Republicans interested in getting Hillary to run again is
let's be honest, nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs, okay? You bring it up because you really care, and I think that's nice that you care. The rest of us don't care. I'm just telling you a very hard...
Wait, you're saying you personally don't care?
I'm telling you a very hard, ugly truth, okay? Of all the things that I care about, yes, it is below my line. Okay? Of all the things that I care about, it is below my line.
Disappointing.
Well, I think people, if you explain to them what's happening to the Uyghurs in China, they care, but it's not top of mind for them.
That's not
what's
caring.
Top of mind right now is they go to their grocery store and the shelves are empty.
Sure, that I care about. Yeah. I care about the fact that our economy could turn on a dime if China invades Taiwan. I care about that. I care about climate change. I care about I care about America's crippling and, decrepit healthcare infrastructure. But if you're asking me, do I care about a segment of a class of people in another country? Not until we can take care of ourselves will I prioritize them over us. And I think a lot of people believe that. And I'm sorry if that's a hard truth to hear, but every time I say that I care about the Uyghurs, I'm really just lying if I don't really care. And so I'd rather not lie to you and tell you the truth. It's not a priority for me.
And my response to that is, I think it's a sad state of affairs when human rights as a concept globally, falls beneath, tactical and strategic issues that we have to have. We need to have a high watermark.
Belief. That's another luxury belief.
I don't believing in the Human Declaration of Human Rights that Eleanor Roosevelt created with the United Nations. I don't think it's a luxury belief to believe that all humans should have a basic set of human rights.
I think it's a luxury belief.
Right.
And the reason I think it's a luxury belief is we don't do enough domestically to actually express that view in real, tangible ways. So until we actually clean up our own house.
It's America's fault the Uyghurs are being slaughtered. It's America's fault the Uyghurs are being enslaved. It's America's fault about slave labor. This guy, this billionaire, is a disgusting buffoon. Until we clean up our act, really? People are being slaughtered. I'm sure he's made a fortune, or people like him, billionaires have made a fortune off China. There's always an excuse. It's America. If America doesn't clean up its act, first he wants our shelves to be full. First he wants that. Look, there's always going to be issues in this country. It's a big country, a diverse country. There's an enormous amount of resources in this country. You can point to anything you want, even in your own lives, as an excuse. But how hard is it to condemn the mass enslavement and slaughter of the Uyghurs? And I don't hear enough of that in this country from the Democrat Party or, frankly, the Muslim community in this country. I don't hear it. And it's incredibly shocking to me. Incredibly shocking. That's where the protest should be, not to get out Lady Al-Qaeda. The protest should be against the Olympics. The protest should be against NBC for exclusively covering the Olympics and making a fortune off the Olympics. The protest should be at every NBA game or any professional sporting clubs or organizations that are involved in making money through China or off of China. That's where the protest should be, but they're not. Instead, it's like this fool. You see, you always fall back on, if we get our own act together and until we fill our own shelves, excuse me, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can denounce Joe Biden for failing to have a serious economic program, one that just devours our economic system, takes money from one person and redistributes it to the Democrat Party base, or does other things that cause inflation and shortages, supply chain problems. Anybody ever heard of supply chain problems before Biden and the Democrats took over our economy, or much of it? So on the one hand, this guy contributes to that party. On the other hand, he complains about the results. And then on the third hand, he talks about until we get our act together, which I guess means more spending, more Democrats, longer Biden. It's just not something he wants to think about, the Uyghurs. Now you know why and how things happen around the world. Now you know how the Holocaust happened. He sounds like the publisher of the New York Times. Sulzberger thought the same exact way. With the publisher of the Washington Post, thought exactly the same way. That's correct. And they were both Jewish. But they were very much Americanized, and they just didn't want to be seen as American Jews, with emphasis on the second word, so they downplayed the whole thing. And for other reasons, FDR wanted them to downplay it. Asked the entire media to do so. But here you have this guy. I mean, if this is the way we think, then we shouldn't be surprised that when we, as Americans, find ourselves with our backs against the wall, other countries say, hey, it's not top line for me. It's not something I think about. Not something I'm worried about. I'm worried about my Lamborghini. I'm worried about, it's really, I'm glad this was made public. And it's interesting to me, you had two hosts here. The first host we saw really was not objecting. He wasn't even troubled. He certainly didn't sound it. The second one was, to his credit, that this was really appalling. This was supposed to be and was mostly a friendly interview. And here it is. The NBA Golden State Warriors team apparently has more than one owner, with whatever his name is, being a minority owner. We told you about his comments earlier today when he claimed that he doesn't care one iota about China's genocide of the Uyghurs. Since then, the Golden State Warriors PR team has put out a statement throwing him under the bus. They said, as a limited investor who has no day-to-day operating functions with the Warriors, he does not speak on behalf of our franchise, and his views certainly don't reflect those of the organization. I think they do. How come the other investors haven't gotten together and gotten rid of him? We've seen that before. That was the tweet by the PR team. They don't get into detail on what views they are talking about with respect to this chairman, but they are clearly referring to the Uyghurs. NBA player Enes Kanter Freedom has also been speaking out today, shaming the co-owners. This guy is terrific, this senator. He's from Turkey. Erdogan wants him to come back, so obviously he can hang him. He says, when NBA says we stand for justice, don't forget there are those who sell their soul for money and business, like Hamath, the owner of the Warriors, who says nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs. When genocides happen, it's people like that let it happen. Shame. And he's right. Apparently this guy is a venture capitalist. He's founder and CEO of Social Capital and part owner of the Golden State Warriors. Social Capital. Oh, yes, yes, yes. We left-wing Democrats are compassionate human beings. We care more about people than anybody else. No, they don't. They don't care about people in the least. To paraphrase Marx, sometimes you have to have a period of despotism in order to change society. The problem with Marxism is that period of despotism never ends. And how do you know when you've reached the pinnacle? Something that Lenin asked. He says, Marx tells us how to revolt and why and so forth, and how society should be, but he doesn't tell us how to govern. What do I do now? What do you do now? Anyone who's in the way gets slaughtered or gets crushed. And you impose your own views. You project them onto society. Look at what Xi's doing. Look at UN, for God's sakes. Look at what they do in Cuba or Venezuela. They're just dictators, dressed up as revolutionaries, but they are dictators nonetheless. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you next time on Levin TV.